everybody, my name is Wes Anderson, the Community Relations Director here at Southern Hancock. Welcome to a brand new video series that we call Schools 101. In this video series, we're going to discuss various aspects of how schools are run. We want to educate you on how schools work and the challenges that schools currently face. We think that's an important thing for our parents, students, community members, taxpayers, constituents to understand. Today we're going to give you a quick brief intro into school finance. Now, we realize school finance is a complicated topic. We'll never be able to cover everything here in just a few minutes. So let me put my email on the screen. If you have any questions or you want more information about a specific thing that I talk about or some clarification, anything like that, happy to continue this conversation. Just send me an email and we can get that started at any time. Schools are funded in two main ways. One, from the state budget, and two, from your property taxes. Now, simply stated, the state budget pays for people, and the property taxes pay for things. So we use the tuition support we get from the state for things like paying teachers, and we use the money from the property taxes to pay for utilities and insurance and buses and any other facility costs that we may have. Now I want to stop right here and clarify this for just a second. One of the questions I receive most often in my position is, how come you built this new thing or added on to a building, but you don't offer this new class or you don't lower class sizes? The divide I just mentioned is exactly why that happens. Money for teachers comes from a different place than money for capital projects or transportation. Let's talk about the state budget for a moment. Every 2 years, the state legislature approves a new budget for the state of Indiana. K-12 education is over half of the state budget. From that budget, each school corporation receives what's called tuition support funding. Now here's how that works. In Indiana, we receive tuition support based on our enrollment. Each student enrolled in our corporation brings us almost $6,000 in funding from the state. There are two parts to the formula for how this number is determined. The first part is called the base grant. Every corporation in Indiana receives the same amount of money from the base grant. Now the second part, and here's where things change, is called the complexity grant. This is a formula based on certain demographic factors in each district. Essentially, the more complex the educational challenges are in your district, the higher amount of money you receive. So, we receive about $6,000 per student between the base grant and the complexity grant. Some other corporations may receive as much as $8,000 per student. Each school is funded differently, and they face their own challenges because of that. We plan to cover enrollment and growth in a future Schools 101 video, but let's talk briefly about how funding is connected to enrollment. Since we're funded per student, if our enrollment goes up, then obviously our budget goes up as well. If our enrollment goes down, then our budget decreases and we have to adjust because of that. Schools who are growing have more money than schools that aren't. That's why we are particularly concerned with a dip in our enrollment for 2020-2021. Budget cuts had to be made because enrollment went down. It's a moving target. We have to continue to make adjustments to hit that target each year. Now let's talk about property taxes. Indiana is a property tax cap state, meaning there's a maximum amount you can be required to pay as a homeowner. So residential areas are capped at 1%. That means that your property tax bill can only be as high as 1% of your home's true tax value. Agriculture is capped at 2%. Commercial is capped at 3%. Now, there are a number of agencies who receive your property tax money, like schools, police, fire, other municipalities like counties or towns or cities, libraries, and fairgrounds. So all of us have to set our own property tax levy to make sure we all stay under the cap. We're playing in the same sandbox, and we all have to leave room for each other to increase the levy if one of us needs to. This has made schools even more dependent on the state budget. The money we receive from property taxes is a fraction of what we receive from the state budget. We rely heavily on the legislature to adequately fund schools in the state budget each year. As I said earlier, property taxes pay for non-educational or operational costs. This money is how we pay for utilities, transportation, human resources, business and payroll, legal fees, personnel responsible for all the state reporting we have to do, and insurance. These are, within reason of course, the same costs we would incur regardless of our enrollment. A question I receive pretty frequently is about your property taxes paying for other people's education, particularly when it comes to transfer students. As you can see, that's not exactly the case. Your property taxes allow us to open our doors each day so we can keep the lights on and heat our buildings. The state budget is what pays for the education of all the students regardless of where they live. There's one other issue I want to talk about related to property taxes. The town of New Palestine has what's called a TIF district, T-I-F, Tax Increment Financing. TIF is an economic development tool used to create growth in areas and generate additional revenue for cities, towns, or county governments. Where does that money come from? That's what we're going to talk about. Say you own a field like this one. For simplicity's sake, we'll say the field is 10 acres in size. Your field, like all property, has an assessed value and you pay property taxes on it. Again, for simplicity's sake, let's say the field is assessed at $1,000 per acre. Now I'm going to stop right here. In the real world, things aren't nice round numbers, obviously, but we're trying to keep the math as simple as possible. As of late last year in Indiana, your farm field will be assessed at $1,560 per acre. We're rounding down a bit so we can all understand the concept here, okay? Now, back to our example. Your field is assessed at $1,000 per acre. It's 10 acres. That means its assessed value is $10,000. So since you own this field, you pay property taxes on it. In Indiana, agriculture is taxed at a maximum rate of 2%. 2% of $10,000 is $200. That's your property tax bill. It comes from the assessor. You pay that, and then the money goes to all the taxing agencies I mentioned earlier, like schools and police and fire and libraries and everybody else. Now, let's talk about what happens when your area is declared a TIF district. In our example, we'll say that your local government has designated your field in a TIF. Because they did that, a company now wants to buy your field so they can build a building. So then you sell them the field, and then this building gets built there. The company's building, like your field, has an assessed value. Obviously, it's going to be worth a lot more than the field you used to own. So let's say the building's assessed at $1 million. The new owner also pays property taxes on their new building. But commercial properties are taxed at a maximum of 3%, not 2% like your field. So that means the building's property tax bill is $30,000. That's obviously a lot more than the $200 that you paid for your field. So here's the payoff, literally. The difference in the taxes collected from the field and the taxes collected from your building, which is $29,800 in our example, is called the tax increment. So the $200 that went to your public school, firehouse, library, fairgrounds still goes to them. However, the municipality that created the TIF keeps that $29,800 in increment. It goes to them and doesn't go to your schools, firefighters, library. So that's how a TIF works. The town, city, or county keeps all the money from going to the taxing agencies. In most cases, some of the increment is returned to the owner of the building. It's a form of a tax break for the company in exchange for building in a given area. It's a win-win for the businesses and the municipality. However, it's a loss for your schools, public safety officials, and the rest of our taxing entities. Now, in our example, $29,800 will go away from those taxing agencies every year. Now, imagine a really big field and imagine some really expensive buildings. You can begin to see how quickly the money adds up. In many communities in Indiana, the tax increment collected by cities, towns, and counties is hundreds of millions of dollars or more. In a select few metropolitan or suburban communities, it's more than $1 billion total. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This sounds really bad. And in some cases, you're right. Some TIFs are set up in such a way that a municipality will annex property through a land grab and then immediately set it as a TIF district, wait for buildings to get built, and then keep all that money for themselves. But it doesn't always have to be that way. Some TIFs have what's called a pass-through, where a portion of the increment collected will always go through to those taxing agencies that need it. It's important to know where the TIFs are in your area and how those impact your local taxing agencies like schools, police, and fire. TIFs can last for a period of up to 20 years. So every year for that period, potentially the full tax increment is collected and taken from schools, police, and fire. Only your area's redevelopment commission can decide what to do with that increment. You should ask your local commission how they're supporting schools and libraries while they take that tax increment from them. I'll put this link on the screen here, which is a website to learn about where TIFs are in your area. So as you can see, the school finance picture is very complicated. But we hope after watching this video you have a general understanding of how finance works. In our next video, we're going to take that finance piece and apply it to our district enrollment and our district's growth plan and how they're both impacted by the financial situation. Thanks for watching Schools 101.